might remember a few months ago, I spoke to Maggie Gilewicz on my podcast about her book, How to Make Sure Your Life Doesn't Suck, a different kind of guide to navigating the ups and downs of life. And I was particularly interested in this book because there are some overlaps between some of the things she writes about and some of the things that I wrote about in my book, Shine Manifesto. Both of these are excellent books. You should head over to Amazon and buy them now. If you can only afford one, then get mine, obviously. But hers is, also an awesome book. And like I said, there are some overlaps. And so she wanted to return the favour and interview me for my podcast about my book. And I'm not used to being interviewed, but hopefully managed to navigate this pretty well. And she has very kindly let me use the audio and the video on my podcast too. So we talk about a few things. We talk about our place in the system, this system of life that us humans have created for ourselves, how we need to guide ourselves down our own true path by following our true north and stop looking for validation, affirmation, approval and permission and things like that. And we talk about lots of things. I talk about fear. I talk about how sometimes fear is the signpost we're looking for, and we need to follow that fear and do the things that frighten us. And yeah, we go all over the place. Really interesting conversation. We're in lockdown conditions now, so we're doing it remotely via Zoom. So you might hear some background noise. My little baby daughter is locked down with us, and she's quite vocal. She's getting her voice at the moment, so you might hear her in the background. But I hope you enjoy this podcast. I really enjoyed chatting with Maggie, and quite possibly we might be returning to do this another time as well. There's so many different areas that we touch upon. It'd be great to do a third podcast where we can talk about both our contributions, both our ideas, and take it a little bit further. But we'll see about that. We'll see if we can sort something out for the future. In the meantime, here is my conversation about my book, Shine Manifesto, with the author of How to Make Sure Your Life Doesn't Suck, Dr. Maggie Gilewicz, and I hope you enjoy it. All right, thanks a lot.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Today, I'm really, really excited to be chatting with Chris Brock, who's a writer, author of 3 books. I have 2 of these books with me. One is a Shine Manifesto.
That's my most recent one, yep.
Yes, find your authentic self, live your authentic life, and do this thing, have the power, overcome self-doubt, and build the life you love.
Yeah, so that was my first book. So, and you like them? You think they're okay?
I've read this one because my list of books is so long that it's crazy how many books are on my list that I promised to read. And
I know. I'm not reading any more books now. I'm not buying any new books until I've read.
It's incredible. But I absolutely enjoyed reading the book. For those of you who might not know, Chris actually interviewed me about my book some time ago when we were not experiencing the situation that we are currently in.
Yeah, global
I was
apocalypse.
The apocalypse, and I was lucky enough to be able to actually commute to Covent Garden and see Chris in person and be interviewed in person, and I will also share the links to that interview if you missed it, if you're interested. So we decided that basically we can just continue talking, because it turns out that even though our books are very, very different, we talk about a lot of similar subjects. We basically talk about the same things, only we talk about it differently. And so I thought it would be a great idea, as I was reading the Shine Manifesto, which I highly recommend. I was saying to Chris before we came on that this is a book written by what I describe a wisdomless person, a person who actually you can tell straight away, you spend quite a bit of time on self-reflection, and I just loved reading it. I know I will be going back to certain subjects because I was inspired to actually talk about certain topics you cover in your book on my podcast, just sort of individually. And I thought, let's just sort of extract certain themes from your book and then just have a chat about them.
Cool. Because this is what I thought because your book was the last book I read, and I thought there's so much common ground here it would be great to carry on our conversation, so.
Absolutely, and I absolutely love talking to you, and it's such a pleasure. So, but before we actually move on to discussing those various topics, can you tell me a little bit, me and us, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and actually what led you to writing these books in the first place?
Yeah, sure. Well, so my story then, I suppose it's I don't know. I guess the first book I wrote was I kind of got it myself into a bit of a pit of despair, if you like. I felt like I'd hit rock bottom, and on the outside, everything seemed to be going well. So I was getting
Mm-hmm.
some really amazing photography jobs. Prior to that, I'd been a journalist, and I'd edited magazines in London and New York, and yeah, it was all very cool. Sounded great, but actually, was struggling a lot with kind of self-doubt and anxiety and um, low self-esteem, these kind of things. I've never a particularly confident person, and I went freelance after a particularly difficult relationship with a boss I had, who was a bit of a bully, and that was kind of the last straw for my self-confidence, if you like. And I decided to go freelance as a photographer. And anyone who works in the creative industries knows that it's really tough out there to make a living. So I was supporting my living by I spent some time working as a carer with disabled people, and then ended up taking a job as a delivery driver, delivering groceries around the place. And it was actually a great job, but it was one of those situations like I was just thinking to myself, how did I get here? I've done everything I was told to do. I kind of, I wasn't an A grade student. I was a bit of an underachiever, but I've got a head on my shoulders. I've kind of, my LinkedIn profile is amazing. My CV is amazing. Where is my reward? And I was really angry that I was seeing everyone else who was either, not as, I don't want to kind of blow my own trumpet too much, but people who I thought weren't as diligent or hard workers as I was,
Mm-hmm.
um, were doing really well out of life. They were kind of
Mm-hmm.
getting the rewards. They had the nice houses and the nice cars. And for me, it just been year after year, actually getting worse and worse and worse on many levels. And I'd done everything I thought I was supposed to do, everything everyone told me to do. um, the advice from parents growing up, the advice from school and teachers, and I followed the instructions pretty much to the letter. And here I was, not where I thought I was going to be, and I got pretty fed up about it. And
Mm-hmm.
having done everything external to try and make things, to try and influence my situation, the CV, I'd practiced job interviews, I'd done so much to try and get myself together. The only thing left to do really was look inside. And as soon as I started, well, I mean, I say as soon as I started looking inside, but things got better very quickly um,
Mm-hmm.
when I started looking inwards. And it was a really bizarre paradox that, I tried as hard as I could to control my outside world,
Mm-hmm.
and I couldn't. But the moment I turned my attention to my inside world, my outside world started to fall into place.
Mm-hmm. Was
And
there was there a point at which can you actually pinpoint the moment? Because you said, the moment I started looking inwards, but can you actually remember um, the moment when that happened, or when you knew that it's time to change the direction in which you were looking up till that point?
well, I think it's one of these things that it just, there were a few kind of milestones for me, and people were, and I was kind of on this journey. I knew I had to look inwards, and I started reading books about it, and none of it was making any sense. And there's a lot
Mm-hmm.
of it. I mean, if you go on Instagram, there's lots of kind of catchy quotes and things like this that they're amazing and they're really spiritual. And
Mm-hmm.
I was kind of soaking up this content, but none of it was actually working. I was trying all these affirmations. Everyone said, "Oh, you got to try affirmations because they'll change your perspective and all this kind of
Mm-hmm.
stuff." And I spent weeks. I would drive to the depot in the morning, and I'd just be going over these affirmations in my head, and it wasn't doing anything for me. And then people had said things like thoughts aren't facts, and I was like,
Mm-hmm.
what does that even mean?
Mm-hmm.
And then there was someone else said something like, you should only give energy to the thoughts that serve you. I'm like, what does that mean? And the whole time, basically my whole life, in my head, there's this voice just saying, you're a failure, you're a loser. Why did you do that? Why did you say that thing to that person all those years ago? Why didn't you make this decision? Why didn't you make that decision? Why did you decide to do this? You terrible waste of space. And then I was in the shower one day, and I just remember that phrase, only give energy to the thoughts that serve you. And I had this kind of raging torrent of negativity going on in my head, and I just decided I didn't want to listen to it anymore. And it was almost like I turned the tap off. And in that moment, it kind of went quiet, and it was like it's like an epiphany had happened. It was like, wow, I don't actually have to listen to this stuff that's going on in my head, this kind of constant negativity. I can actually exert some control, or at least step away and not listen to it. It doesn't actually have to be a part of me. And then that was kind of when the floodgates opened. Then I suddenly, everything started to fall into place. All the things I'd read, all these kind of catchy and inspiring memes that you see, and these books that I've been reading, suddenly it started to make sense. And over the next months, years, by changing my perspective internally, things started to happen. I became more aware of opportunities. I became kind of more aware of my own undermining and self-sabotaging behaviors and things like this. And actually, life got much better. Life, started to pick up. And yeah, I'm in a very different place now, both in actual terms and emotional and mental terms than I was all those years. Well, not even all those years ago, probably about 3 or 4 years ago. And then, so the first book I wrote is a kind of self-help book, but it talks a little bit about my journey. But that was meant as a kind of, when I wrote that book, it was like, that is the person I was, and I'm done with that now. That's kind of, I've drawn a line. So I like to think of it as kind of, I never had the confidence to be able to do anything. Everything, I was always afraid of everything. And I like to think I went from being someone who can't. So whenever anyone said, why don't you think about getting a mortgage? Well, I was like, I'm not someone who can do that. I can't do that. Why don't you think about, fixing it yourself? I can't fix that. I'm no good with like electrics or tools or whatever. And I went from being someone who can't, just generally, to being someone who can. And that first book was kind of drawing a line under it. Here's the process I went through. And yeah, it's amazing what you can do if you just try. And
But I mean, even though I haven't read this one, I sort of skimmed through it. It's a skill that I had to learn when I was doing my PhD, because I would just not be able
just reading so many books.
To read so many books that were required. So I had to be able to, find the information that I specifically needed for, whatever reason. But I could tell straight away that one was very different to this one.
Yeah, completely.
Right.
Completely.
So I'm interested, can we talk a little bit about what's the difference? What happened in between these two books that eventually led you to writing this one?
Well, the first one, it's called Do the Thing Have the Power? So it's kind of a self-help book, and the thing is basically action. And it's from a quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson, and it's just whoever does the thing shall have the power. That's basically the quote. And it's basically, and this is what I kind of learned when I was kind of pulling myself out. It's like, if you want to get anywhere, you have to take action. If you want to achieve anything, you have to take action. And I've just been scared of what might go wrong. And my whole life I've been told not to rock the boat. Don't do anything other than what you're supposed to do, what you're told to do, all this kind of stuff. And you end up denying who you are. And that's what had happened to me. I'd gone down a course that wasn't intended for me, or at least I'd taken a course that wasn't aligned with who I was. And my history so I spent 10 years as a freelance photographer, but before that I was a journalist. And I had this toxic relationship with this boss, my last boss, prior to going freelance.
The one you mentioned, the one who was a bully?
Yeah, who kind of destroyed my confidence. or I should say, who I allowed to destroy my confidence. But I was in a position where, I was.
I hear you.
Too weak. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're 100% responsible for where we are right now.
Of
And we don't need to be too hard on ourselves about that. But just as soon as we recognize that, then we gain the power to change our situation. But after that, I kind of said to myself, I'd always wanted to be a writer and create and write. I'd always wanted to be in the kind of creative industries. And after that experience, I said to myself, I don't want to write anymore ever again. And that's why I'd already retrained as a photographer, because I'd been working with a lot of photographers on the magazines that I was producing, and I always was astonished at the work they did. And I wanted to do that, and also disengage my brain from this whole kind of very thought heavy environment when you're in a corporate communications environment. And then I wrote my first book, Do the Thing, Have the Power. I wrote it mainly on my iPhone. You can get Microsoft Word for iPhone. And I wrote it while I was taking my 20-minute breaks when I was driving my van on the night shift and things like that. And after that, I realized that it's a weird thing. We attach, as humans, we're emotional beings, and we attach feelings to things. So I have a friend of mine who had a bad experience when he lived in a certain town, and now he can't go back to that town. So basically the experience he's had now owns that town. He can't go back there because that part of his life is now owned by this bad experience. And essentially I realized what I'd done was I'd attached all this negativity to writing, and I'd let that bad experience steal writing from me. And having written my book the first time, and it was a really amazing thing, I'd gone from someone who can't to someone who's published a book, which is kind of like it's a good confidence booster and very empowering. And I thought, well, I'm going to take it back. I'm going to take writing back. I'm going to own it again, because it's not for anyone to take away from me, and no experience to take away from me. Just like if you have a bad experience in a particular town, you don't owe that experience anything. You don't owe them that power of you to never be able to step foot in that town again. So yes, I took it back, and then I started to enjoy writing. I started to enjoy the thinking processes involved, and the more I would think, the more I gained kind of clarity over my reality, if you like. And so I just started blogging, and I wrote it on my commute on the train to and from work. And yeah, it's more of a kind of experiment in writing, I guess, writing and thinking. But it's about kind of the world we live in and our experience of reality, and how we can gain ownership of that as long as we're true to who we are.
Yeah, which is a brilliant segue. Couldn't wish for a better segue to my next question, or more like the first question regarding your book. So one of the first things you talk about in your book is the system, what you describe as a system. And this is the one topic that, funnily enough, as a sociologist, you'd think that this is something I would talk about a lot, like in my book, but I just, that's not that kind of book. So this is why I didn't talk about it too much. But I am absolutely fascinated, just generally, and as a sociologist as well, in how, our cultural upbringing, social norms, education and everything sort of affect the way we think, and what we think is important, and our values, and how we relate to people and situations, how we view success, for example, and things like that. So can you because I think it's something that it's such an important topic that I really truly believe that a lot of people, and this is not a judgment, because I think we all do it to a certain extent, are simply not aware of the impact all these things that you describe under this umbrella of the system have influence on us, until we wake up and realize and start thinking for ourselves, start questioning the norms,
Yeah.
etc. So can you tell me a little bit about you what you describe as the system?
Well, I mean, I'm no academic, and I'm sure for people who have studied sociology like you and all of this kind of stuff, it would probably, my perspective on this probably would seem very basic. But, we're products of a system, and, we serve the society we live in. So if you think about it, you're born, you're registered when you're born, you have a birth certificate, and then you go to school, and then you go to college, and school has a function in society. Society might need more doctors. There might be a period where more engineers are needed, where more um, uh, artists are needed, where more scientists are needed. So the education system caters to the needs of society, this kind of bigger system. And so we're brought up to be these. There is a kind of danger of losing sense of the individual human in all of this.
Mm-hmm.
So we're brought up to be what society needs, and then you go into any city, you fall into these kind of norms of organization. So there's nothing to stop you walking wherever you want to walk, but there are pavements there, and so pedestrians walk on the pavements, cars go on the road. It's a
Mm-hmm.
system of control, if you like. And some of these systems are there for our benefit, and they're, I'm glad I don't get knocked over every time I go walking in the city, because I know where it's safe to walk and where it's not safe to walk.
Yeah.
But there are other things, being other forces being exerted upon us,
Mm-hmm.
such as the system. Certainly the Western system is based on money. We need money to
Mm-hmm.
keep the wheels turning,
Mm-hmm.
and the way that the system gets money is by us spending on things, and the way to get us to spend things is to make us want stuff, and the only way that we can want stuff is if we're unhappy with our lives. So I have a TV downstairs, and if we were all happy with the TVs we've got, the TV industry would go out of business. So they're making us feel dissatisfied with the TVs we've got, because here's a new one. My iPhone is amazing. It does video. It does. I can do FaceTime with friends. I can send text messages and emails. I don't even need a laptop anymore. I can just do it all on my smartphone. But there's always a better one, and I'm always kind of being encouraged to see what I've got as
Mm-hmm.
being not good enough. And it's the same with us. We're being kind of fed these images of hunky people and successful people, and
Mm-hmm.
people with amazing bodies, amazing hair, amazing lifestyles. You look at Instagram, you look at you just walk down the high street, and we're being bombarded with all this kind of information to make us buy stuff. And the way that we buy stuff, the way we aspire to be anything, is by
Mm-hmm.
wanting more. And in order to want, we need to be aware of how little we have. And this was certainly the problem I had, when I was down in the dumps, when I was driving my van, and I was pretty miserable. I was like, my life is just not good enough. But I wasn't actually taking any notice of the life I had. I have a wonderful wife. I had a roof over my head. I had a lot of really amazing stuff going for me, but I was kind of blind to all of that, because I was so obsessed with getting somewhere else and being somewhere better, because society needs us to have that hunger. Otherwise everything stops working. Everything kind of grinds to a halt. If prior to the Industrial Revolution everyone had said, actually, no, I'm quite happy where I am now, we don't need kind of mass production of anything, we don't need kind of steel mills and mass
Mm-hmm.
produced clothing, then we wouldn't be where we are today. It's the machine, in order to keep progressing, needs us to be hungry for more.
Mm-hmm.
But the cost of that is that we get depressed, we get anxiety, we get dissatisfied with who we are, where we are, what we've got.
Yeah,
And
because we're living in that constant state of comparison that takes us out of what truly matters to us,
yeah,
to that image of what we think is important or of value, uh, according to whatever we were taught, by our parents or our
yeah,
environment or
completely.
culture, and so on and so forth. And I think that's until and I believe like most people are not even aware. I mean, I didn't know. Do you remember in my book I mentioned that I was about I was about to turn 30 when I read my first
Yeah.
self-help book, and the title was "You Can Have What You Want." And the
Mm.
trouble was, I had no idea, and it was frightening for me to even open that book, because I knew that it's going to take me places where I've never been, where
Yeah.
I will have to ask myself what I truly want, as opposed to what I thought I needed to be, or what I thought were the expectations that, for example, my parents had of me.
Yeah.
What
Absolutely.
it meant to be successful, right? So this is why I was saying that I didn't mean the choice of a degree or a career. I knew that I was about to ask myself on a much deeper level, what is it that I actually truly care about, and
Yeah.
what truly matters. And I knew that also that reflection will basically open up, just entire set of issues I will have to confront, and truths that I will have to confront that I wasn't willing to right up till that point, or simply wasn't aware that they were even there.
But
But
that,
I just knew that my life was not going to be the same after that.
that's what's so frightening about it, and empowering at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
because we have this kind of cushion around us of guidance. We have
Mm-hmm.
people telling us the right things and the wrong things to do, so we
Mm-hmm.
don't need to make
Mm-hmm.
that decision for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we have people telling us what to do next. You just finished school, go to university or get a job or whatever it is. It's like, okay, I'll do that, thanks for letting me know.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
the whole problem with doing this is that you end up living your life according to other people's values, and so your results, they're not aligned with who you really are. So this is why people spend their whole lives doing a law degree, for example, and then become very successful lawyers, but are deeply unhappy because
Absolutely.
they've done what their parents wanted them to do, or they've done what their
Mm-hmm.
school said, this is what success looks like.
Mm-hmm.
But actually success, you get these people that make a lot of money and then they reject it all and go and become poets and buy themselves a house in the woods and things. And it happens all the time. You hear about these kind of people who've gone off and started businesses doing something completely different
Yeah.
because they've got to a stage, midlife crisis, if you like, where they realize that, what they've been doing is not aligned with who they truly are. But I got to the age of about 40, I realized I'd never made a major life decision without asking for advice, permission, what somebody else thought about it, and
Right.
so when I wrote my first book, I didn't say to anyone, I'm thinking about writing a book, what do you think? I
Mm-hmm.
just went and did it because it was the first time in pretty much my entire life that I decided to do something myself
Mm-hmm.
and
Wow.
deal with the consequences. I mean, when was the last time you asked, or you did something without asking someone's opinion or their permission or what they thought?
And here's the difference. I think that in the last, I would say, 8 years, the difference is, it's not that I don't ask for an advice or an opinion. It's just that I realize that the most important advisor is my own heart.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
And that is the difference between the rest, the majority of my life and the last, I would say, about 8-9 years, where yes, of course, I will ask for an opinion or advice of people whose opinion I value, and I will take it into account and I will reflect. But ultimately, my intuition and what my heart tells me to do is the most important thing, that I take into account.
But this is the problem as well. I mean, we're kind of led away from trusting our own inner voice, our own internal compass a lot. We're bombarded with news media. We're bombarded with, corporate messages. We're kind of given this framework of what's right and wrong. People, you talk to people about the Bible, for example, and people say, well, without the Bible, how would I know what the difference between right and wrong? And it's like, well, when did you lose faith with where did your power go to make
Hmm.
decisions? Why are we so
Hmm.
afraid of trusting ourselves?
Well, I have one answer to this question.
Okay, cool.
It starts very early on in school.
Mm. Oh yeah.
It starts with the whole notion of the right answer.
Oh
It
yeah.
starts with teachers or kids laughing at you when you ask a question and deeming that question as being stupid because you think outside of the box, because or when you give an answer that is outrageous but creative, and you're being dismissed or ridiculed or criticized for how you, I mean, the number of times I was either asked to leave the class or being told off for my answer to
Yeah.
a question when I was just being creative. Sometimes I was told off for asking certain questions because my question was seen as my attempt to undermine authority
Well, it's
rather than
interesting,
a
isn't it?
sign of curiosity. So, I mean, this is how they systematically, and by the way, I want to make it very clear, I value education highly. I just wish that education was educating both the head and the heart, and
Yeah.
more importantly, teaching people to think for themselves from the very, very early age. So I'm not, waging a battle against education here. I'm just saying that there are certain behaviors, maybe less now than back when I was in, say, primary school, where honestly original thinking, creativity were absolutely stifled, fought against by our own teachers. So
Well, I mean,
this is how it starts.
it's interesting. I mean, education supports, it serves a purpose for society and for
Mm-hmm.
the individual, as we kind of mentioned at the beginning. But it doesn't serve society to have a whole population of free thinking individuals. It needs workers. And I think even it was one of the American presidents, who might have been Eisenhower or someone like that, said, I want an education system that doesn't give me independent thinkers, it gives me workers, because
Mm-hmm.
workers are what drive the economy. They want to keep the system going that I've kind of talked about.
Yeah.
It's kind of this framework of pigeonholes that we need to fit into in order to fulfill various purposes. Um, there's this whole notion like that we need to be categorized. I think it was I've forgotten his name now, but there was a very famous thinker, and he said it's no uh, what is it? It's no mark of health to be well adjusted to a sick society. And the problem is we're not regimented. We're not robots. We all kind of look roughly the same. We all have two arms, two legs. We come in varying different shapes and sizes. And you've got more hair than I have. Some people are a different color. Some people are a different gender. Some people are taller. Whatever. We look roughly human. But
Mm-hmm.
inside us, we don't have a form. We're just kind of this free floating energy. We're amorphous, if you like. We don't have any
Mm-hmm.
shape really. And then we try and put ourselves into square holes. It's like trying to get something that has no shape and putting it into a square hole.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not in our nature to do this. And so we end up losing our confidence. We end up becoming sick, having anxiety, having all kinds of, the system isn't natural. And so you get heart disease, you get cancers that wouldn't happen in nature. You get all kinds of mental and emotional difficulties. And it's from not being aligned with who we truly are.
Yeah, which is why I'm saying that um, we talk about similar things in our books, in that you know I always say there's so many books, there's so much advice, there's so many experts, and we continue, and it's okay to be listening to, I encourage people to listen to other people, in particular if those people are wise and have something wise to say. But even then, even if you are listening to someone who is respected, who you respect, this doesn't mean that you have to switch your brain off, your own
Mhm.
brain, and question and reflect on whether that information that you've just heard resonates with you. We just, as soon as someone has that label attached of an expert or authority, like I talk about in my book, it is that we seem to be switching off our own sort of internal compass,
Yeah.
and also consoled with it, we just sort of blindly follow the advice of whoever we consider to be authority or an expert. I love that part in your book when you say, when we understand that we no longer need to be told what to think, but we must learn to think for ourselves, we begin to discover who we are. We begin to realize that it's not somebody else's life that we need, but we need to create a life of our own. we can feed ourselves, we can stop yearning for the clothes, the cars, the material frivolities of others to validate our sense of worth, because that validation comes from inside us. When somebody else achieves a level of success, we don't take it personally as a reflection of our own failure. We don't feel bitter. We don't think that we are in any way lessened by what they have done, because we no longer need to compare ourselves with the benchmarks of the outside world. I mean, man, I wish I wrote the way I could write the way.
Okay.
But you know, but that's another thing that we were talking about, that when you talk about the system, and we talk about all these you know, social cultural norms, what we're talking about is that the way most of us look at life, which is from that outside in perspective, all of this has this underlying current of that way of looking life in a way that we believe that our self-worth, who we are, has anything to do with our circumstances, with things that are basically external. So like you were saying, the clothes we wear, the place we live, the careers we're having, you know, we have all these ideas about what you know, we basically attach our self-worth and value to those things, and we also depend our happiness and well-being on those external things. So I mean, it's a tough life when you think how many
Yeah.
things you will have to tick off the list before you can start being happy or satisfied. And the trouble is that it is a never ending loop, because once you achieve a set of things you wanted to achieve, it's never enough, because someone else has more, because someone
Yeah.
decided that, you know, there's, or you decided that it's not enough for whatever
There's
reason.
always a new iPhone. There's always a new car,
Yeah.
bigger house. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
But this
Oh
is
yeah.
this is kind of the same thing you were saying. So in your book, you talk about outside in thinking and inside out thinking,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
kind of, you know, a lot of people talk about the same kind of concept. It's like
Mm-hmm.
we say, I'll be happy when I achieve this, or I'll be happy when I'm, you know, two
Mm-hmm.
stone lighter, or I'll be happy when I get a better job or get more money, and all of these kind of things. And it never happens, because there will always be something else. Like you said, you're ticking things off the list, but the list is getting longer and longer faster than you can tick things off.
Mm-hmm.
But how about you? So my kind of, what I learned is that instead of saying I will be happy when my life falls into place,
Mm-hmm.
work on being happy first, because when you're happy first, that causes your life to fall into place. You know, all of
Mm-hmm.
these things that you're striving for on the outside, you're never gonna satisfy yourself. But if you work internally to be happy first, and this is why gratitude is such a powerful thing, because it helps you recognize and focus in on what you've got going for you to begin with. And when you realize that you've got a great relationship, you've got a great house, you've got a good set of skills, you've got everything you need, that's when you start to see opportunities in the real world. That's when your actual real world circumstances start coming together, and not the other way around. We've got kind of cause and effect backwards, you know,
Yes.
rather than saying I will be happy when, we should start saying I will be happy and then my
Mm-hmm.
world will be better, rather than saying, you know, my world will be better, then I'll be happy. You know, turn it around, because that's how it works.
Yeah. You talk a lot in your book about the satisfaction. Like, I think that there are actually even on Twitter, you know, there are certain, and again, I'm not everybody has a different experience of life, because we think about life differently, and that's okay. So I'm really, when I say that, I don't mean it in a dismissive or disparaging way. It's just an observation. For example, as I scroll down the, you know, the feed on Twitter, you know, how certain accounts, you know, it's a constant I would say tweet by tweet is basically focusing around dissatisfaction
Mm-hmm.
and complaining about what's missing, what's wrong with life, what's wrong with this situation, that situation, you know.
Yeah.
And it's almost like some people live in that constant state of dissatisfaction, as you talk about in the book. They're focusing on what's missing. Can you talk a little bit about that? Is that something that basically played a role in your life? It's something that you've been doing for
Yeah, well, I mean, as humans, we're kind of geared to always look at the worst case scenario, because
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of like you don't notice when things work, but you notice when they break down. You don't think your laptop is amazing, but when it breaks down, you're kind of cursing the stupid thing and wanting to smash it
Yeah.
up with a hammer. And
Yeah.
I always think, like, the more you, and this is like pretty common, like, what do you call it, attention bias.
Mm-hmm.
So the more you focus on something, the bigger it gets. So if you decide one day you see a new model of a particular car that you like, this is a common example that people use to demonstrate this. You see this car that you like, and then suddenly you start noticing it everywhere. And it's not that there are more of these cars on the road, you're just more tuned into seeing these cars.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what we're doing when we're complaining a lot. I always say the people who complain the most always have the most to complain about, because the more you start focusing on the things you don't like, the things you're unhappy about with your life,
Mm-hmm.
the more you're going to get tuned into that.
Mm-hmm.
If I started focusing on all the things I didn't have, I would just be I'd constantly be seeing things that I didn't have. Not tall enough, my hair's not good enough. I could easily focus on my waistline or my.
I mean, isn't it incredible how easy it is to make a list of things that you're not happy about or that are missing or whatever than the things that you
Absolutely.
actually could be grateful for?
Well, we're kind of naturally geared towards that. We're they call it in psychology, they call it rumination. So it's this constant
Mm-hmm.
kind of like, oh man, why am I doing this awful job, and
Mm-hmm.
why aren't I good enough, and why aren't I tall enough, and why
Mm-hmm.
aren't I. You talk to Brad Pitt. I'm sure he has got plenty of things that he wishes were better in his life. you know but then,
No.
yeah, I'm sure he has, but at the same time, we can start to train ourselves to see things the other way. So you can start, and this is where gratitude is really, it was a big thing for me. When you start
Mm-hmm.
saying thank you for the things you've got in your life, suddenly you see
Mm-hmm.
more of what you've got, and you see less of the things you
Mm-hmm.
haven't got. You could start saying, oh, I wish I had a better car. Or you could start saying, I'm glad I've got a car at all, to get me from A
Mm-hmm.
to B.
Mm-hmm.
You can say, I'm grateful for the roof over my head. I'm grateful that I can look
Mm-hmm.
out of the window and see this amazing sunset, and
Mm-hmm.
then suddenly you suddenly realize that actually my life is pretty good. It's pretty abundant. And you start to see opportunities, things start to fall into place. When you start to kind of shift your perspective from everything that's going wrong to everything that's going right, you kind of attract more of it, not in any kind of weird spiritual way, but you attract more of it to you because you're more geared up towards those things.
Mm-hmm.
If you go
But
around all day long just unhappy with your life, and
mm-hmm.
how it's so unfair, everything's so unfair, how come that guy gets the better car, how come, and you're stomping around in a bad mood, life kind of reflects that back to you. If you go to the shops and you're in a grumpy mood, you're going to get that same attitude back to you from the people you bump into, the people
Mm-hmm.
you kind of interact with. And if you yeah you get kind of, life reflects back the kind of energy you put out to it. So if you're a miserable so and so, that's the world you're going to inhabit. But if you start to think, actually, life's pretty good. My favorite song was on the radio this morning. I got up, I got a good night's sleep last night. There was I had a lovely breakfast. You start to kind
Mm-hmm.
of shift your attitude and your perspective. And
Mm-hmm.
then that gets reflected back to you as well. So people start responding to you better. Opportunities come to you.
Mm-hmm.
Your world starts to fall into place. Not because you've tried to control the world out there, but because you're controlling the world in here.
Mm-hmm.
And we can all take steps to do that, when actually controlling the world outside us is a much harder job altogether.
I think, I mean, I absolutely agree with you, but ultimately, it's not even so much about what we do as it is about how we see,
Yeah. Hmm.
anything.
Yeah.
Because, which is another reason why I love that you talk so much about perception and thoughts. Because, and I think we talked a little bit of, well, not a little bit, quite a lot. We talk about it in our interview, which is that, I went from seeing life from that outside in perspective, just like you, most of my life, that basically I thought that it's my circumstances, the people in my life that create my experience,
Yeah.
that are responsible for how I feel, right?
Hmm.
So it was pretty shocking to me, to realize that actually, no, it's my thoughts and therefore my perception of my circumstances, of the people, of anything that's external that is responsible for how I feel, right?
Yeah.
And so and you know, I know for them it was difficult for me to see that it's the case in every single instance, which is why one of the books that I brought, because I see so many people, and I completely understand that it's so many people are scared at the moment, you know, because of the pandemic and the situation that are living in, and you know, and we don't have much control over what's happening, you know, and the majority of people, I believe, or again, I don't have statistics, so it's probably not a fair assessment. I don't know how many, but many, I believe, you know, focus on exactly that part that they have no control over, which is the virus, right? The control that we have is taking the measures that we're told to take in order to protect ourselves, right? But there's something else, and like I mentioned, I posted a tweet about the book The Search for Meaning, which was one of the most powerful books I've ever read in my life, by Viktor Frankl, who was the survivor of Auschwitz.
Yeah.
And he talked that you know, people can take that freedom from you, and by that he was describing, you know, being in the you know, in Auschwitz, in the circle. You can't even talk about more horrific circumstances where you really have no control over what's happening. But even he said that even in those horrific circumstances, no one can take away your freedom to choose your own attitude, to choose how you think and how you feel. And I want to really make something very, very clear. This is not about we are free to feel however we feel. So if you feel angry at the moment, if you feel upset or anxious, you're absolutely free to feel that way. But there's a difference between allowing yourself to feel and knowing where those feelings really come from, right? And feeling those things and blaming or seeing everything and everyone being responsible for how you feel. There's a huge difference, right? So in your book, you're saying state of mind is fundamental to our experience of life, but it goes beyond simply adjusting our perspective so that we see things more positively. It is important to understand that when we adopt a positive energy within our psyche, it has an influence in the real world. A good attitude leads to a good world around us. The things we can actually touch, observe, and feel become tangibly better. When we change internally, the world around us also changes, for real, in response to our new behaviors, attitudes, and actions.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does. And you see it. I'm trying to think of some examples here, but it's fundamental. I mean, you know, when I talked about those voices in my head that were kind of constantly undermining me and sabotaging me, and then I had that kind of epiphany in the shower where I realized that I'm not those voices, and I don't have to listen to them all the time. But they have such a wearing kind of impact on you when you are living in that state of kind of negativity all the time, that it starts to not only influence your perspective on the world, but influence the way the world is to you. From a fundamental point of view, it's like
it feels very real. Whatever it is that you're feeling in that moment, it feels incredibly real.
But it also it manifests in the actual real world. So if you think you're a failure, you're going to behave like a failure, and the world will mirror that back to you. So you will be a failure, because if you think you can, you're going to put in the effort to try and make something happen. If you think you can't, you're not going to bother, and that will influence your results. Whereas if you start going around and think that life is actually pretty beautiful, then you start to see more of the beauty around you. You become more tuned into that, and you can start reflecting it to other people. And if I do that, and then the next person does that, and the next person does that, then we can start to create a more kind, more beautiful world for real. You know, it's not just in our heads. We're not just imagining this. We're actually making it happen, because this is what we're putting out there, and it's being reflected back. And you can say the same thing with the pandemic. You know, we could believe it's all a hoax and just go about our daily business, and not believe what the scientists are saying or what we're being told is best practice or whatever. And then it would be a tragedy, because
Mm-hmm.
we spread this virus around willy-nilly, and the number of dead would be horrendous.
Mm-hmm.
Or we can, I as an individual, I can adopt a best practice. I can kind of keep my distance from other people. I can start working on my wellness while I'm in lockdown, and
Mm-hmm.
so can my neighbor, and so can the person down the street. And one by one, we start to influence the real world through our thinking, our perspective, our attitude.
Mm-hmm.
You see it in sports people. You see it in you can entirely change your results by changing your perspective and by changing your inner state. But as long as you're in here thinking, I can't and I can't and I can't and I'm no good and I'm a
Mm-hmm.
failure, then that's what you're going to get from life.
Mm-hmm.
you know
But for me, the greatest shift, I think, happened when I realized that um, the moment I realized that it's my thinking that creates my experience, even when I'm not aware of it, even if it
Mm.
seems that it's the circumstances or people that are creating my experience, it was such a liberating feeling, because all of a sudden the world was not against me, right? I
Yeah.
did not have to roll with the punches. There was nobody to blame. I never, even if I may sound sometimes like that, or it may look to me that I feel, horrible because someone said something or did something, I know deep down that it's not true. I know that I'm in a low state of mind, and that is, and I'm having certain thoughts about whatever it is that is happening currently that is creating my experience. And to some people, some people are really uncomfortable with that, because
Mm.
then they're like, oh, I can't blame
Well, you
people,
have to take responsibility,
circumstances.
don't you?
Right,
Yeah.
right. You can't, you're no longer a victim of
Yeah.
life, you know.
Hmm.
All of a sudden you realize that it really is up to you. And I really want to make it clear, it's not about, we're not talking about anybody having to think positive all the time or constantly choosing the best attitude. It's not about, we're human beings, we are absolutely bound to feeling low and insecure and
Yeah.
scared and stressed, because our thoughts come and go. We have these thoughts, they change. And you know this is basically what the human experience is like I said, it's not about a judgment of how you feel at any given moment. It's about realizing and being aware of where those feelings actually come from, that they don't come from external world, they
Absolutely.
come from whatever is happening in your head in that moment, whether you are aware of it or not.
It's funny. I read an article recently, and the title was "What Arises Within You is About You." And
Mm-hmm.
when you realize that the way I'm feeling is my reaction or response to an external stimulus, but it's not like if someone says something bad to me, like you've got bad hair, or you're looking a little bit overweight, or something like that, those things that I'm a little bit sensitive about, and I get this feeling like I'm hurt
Mm-hmm.
somehow, or I'm angry,
Mm-hmm.
or I'm like, oh, I thought you
Mm-hmm.
liked my hair.
Mm-hmm.
This person hasn't physically reached inside me and turned a switch. It's this feeling is about me. It's about,
Mm-hmm.
it's a reflection of my insecurity about my hair.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I used to, as a photographer, I used to do a lot of teaching, and you would do a portrait class, and we would always need a volunteer to sit on the chair in the middle and have their picture taken. And everyone was like, oh no, I hate having my picture taken. I hate having my picture taken. And that reveals something about you, which is that
Mm-hmm.
you're insecure about how you look. So this
Mm-hmm.
feeling of like, oh, I don't want to have my picture taken. It's about how you look, but you look how you look. That is
Mm-hmm.
just how you look. I mean, you might
Mm-hmm.
brush your hair a certain way, or you might, breathe in a little bit to try and hide your beer belly or whatever it is. But you look how you look.
But we're
And
not talking anything outrageous. You can tell by just looking at your own examples that when you're in a good mood and a person says something, you react completely different
yeah,
to the same words. When you are in a good mood, or when you are just in a nice sort of you just chilled, you just have a
Mhm.
chilled day, and you react very differently when you're tired, when you're angry, when you're feeling low, to the very same situation, to the very same words. I mean, there's nothing, it's not rocket science, it's just common sense that our moods affect, our thoughts create our moods, and our moods dictate the way we respond to anything on a
Absolutely, yeah.
daily basis, right?
And but also it influences the world around you. Like it influences your perspective on the world, but it influences the world around you. So if I've
Mm-hmm.
had a terrible night's sleep and I wake up, I'm in a bad mood, and the milkman is going past my house and he says morning, and I'm like, oh, get lost.
Yeah.
I'm like feeling really grumpy. The milkman is then going to react badly to me.
Mm-hmm.
He may give me the slightly dodgy looking pint of milk, and it's going to
Mm-hmm.
ripple outwards. He's going to now be angry, and he's going to be pass that on to the next person he bumps into. When I was a van driver, and I kind of mentioned this example in my first book, but
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you'd be stuck in traffic, and there'd be people waiting to pull out of a side road, and everyone is desperate to go home. It's the end of the day. You're in rush hour traffic, and nobody is
Yeah.
letting these people out of the side road, and everyone is in this negative mood. It's like it's Monday. I've had a terrible day. I just want to get home, and it's like I'm not letting you out. Why should I let you out? But then you let someone out, and they pull in, and they're not expecting it because everyone is in such a bad mood, and suddenly someone stops to do something generous for them, and they pull out. They can progress a little further on their journey home, and
Yeah.
then their spirit is lifted, and as you approach
Yeah.
the next junction, they stop and they let the person out, and you can see that
The ripple effect.
the ripple effect. Yeah, so
Mm-hmm.
you're this is why you think as an individual my state of mind makes no difference, because the world is the world, and who am I to change this? But one by one we can influence the state of the world. If I
Absolutely.
it's like this quote that is often misattributed to Gandhi. He says, be the change you want to see in the
Mm-hmm.
world.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as you start taking responsibility for your
Mm-hmm.
internal state, if you like, you have an opportunity not just to shape your world, but to shape it for everybody else.
Yeah.
And if we all did that one by one, we could change the world completely. And we're seeing this pandemic as a great example. Everyone is doing, they're locking down, they're staying indoors, and
Mm-hmm.
it's the power of one person multiplied
Mm-hmm.
drastically is actually changing the
Mm-hmm.
world. And we can do this if we're brave enough to accept responsibility for our situation and how we got here and how we're feeling inside.
And I'm talking about this as well, which is we undermine the value of these really tiny, sometimes seemingly meaningless acts of kindness, buying
Mm.
someone a cup of coffee, saying someone that they look nice, or that they did, their speech was great, or like, I love someone said that one compliment can ignite a dream,
Yeah.
in someone, right? Someone notices you for the first time, or randomly asks you if you need help or anything like that. It really has a ripple effect. And but when we focus only on these grand ideas of how to change the world and have an impact, then we genuinely miss out on all these little opportunities every day,
and it, but,
to
it,
do something good.
but it works the other way as well. We need to be really careful about how we address our friends and talk to other people. Like
Hmm.
um, I remember because I wear glasses, I rarely wear sunglasses,
Hmm.
and I thought it's summer. One year I thought I'm going to get myself a pair of sunglasses. I'm going to get prescription sunglasses, and I got these sunglasses, and I'd never really worn sunglasses. My friends had never seen me in sunglasses. And one of my closest friends said to me, "Oh, nice sunglasses." And he made some throwaway comment about you know looking cool or trying to be cool or something like that. And I'd spent all this money on these sunglasses. I never wore them again, and it just knocked my confidence. And it's
Wow.
just something like that. And that's what we focus on and we obsess about.
Hmm.
I fitted my own kitchen. I went from someone who had no idea about DIY, purely because I had to. My wife and I bought this house that needed a lot of work doing, and we just didn't have the money for a huge kitchen, so we fitted our own kitchen. But I remember saying to someone, "We're going to fit our own kitchen," and he said, "That's a bit ambitious."
Right.
And I just thought, "Oh, do you think I'm not the kind of person who could do that.
Right.
And it probably set me back like 3 or 4 months while I regained the courage to actually say, well, maybe I can give it a go, you know.
Which
And
feeds, so basically it basically fed into your old story of you not being able to do
yeah.
anything.
And we do this all the time with people. And it comes from our jealousy. You know, sometimes we see someone having a little bit of success, or we see someone trying something new, or we see someone just putting themselves out there a little bit. And we think it reflects upon us. We're sat here doing nothing with our lives, and we see someone trying to do something with their lives, and we think it's a reflection on our laziness. So we have this kind of inner subconscious thing, and we cut them down. You know, if your friend is trying stand-up comedy or something like this, I'm just picking a random thing out of thin air. You know, they've always liked the idea of being a comic. They go to an open mic night or something like that, and you sort of say to them, really, you're going to an open mic night, but since when have you been funny or done comedy, you know? And that could be enough to stop someone realizing a dream, or, you know,
But
even
this is
it's
why
okay.
but this is why it's so important, that awareness, to
Hmm.
realize that there's no point of taking it personally,
Oh yeah,
because you
absolutely.
have to remember that listen, will we be taking it sometimes personally?
Always. Yeah.
100%. Will we want to tell that person to bugger off? 100%, right? In particular when we're in a low mood. That's also a very human thing to do. I'm just saying that when you at least have that awareness most of the time, that this person is basically expressing their own insecurities or jealousy or whatever state of mind that they're in that particular moment, then there's really no point of taking it personally. But again, you have to be willing to see that.
But also,
um,
this is why we have to go out of our way to celebrate each other and to
mhm,
encourage each other. You know, even if
mhm,
someone has no chance of becoming an amazing stand-up comic, if they're, you know, really enthused about this, we've got to get behind them. And I guess that's what my book is
mhm,
about. You know, we need to recognize, you know, be aware of ourselves, and that these feelings inside
mhm,
are us, you know, that they're coming from within us. But also we need to give everyone else the opportunity and understand that, because I can be sensitive to things that might happen to me, and or,
mhm.
you know, these feelings that are about me, can be triggered by external things. We
Mhm.
can trigger other people as well. So, you know,
But
we need
look,
to celebrate each other.
mhm. But it's of course it's amazing when you are surrounded by people that support your
Yeah.
success, support your dreams and everything. But all, and to me it's like a bonus. To me it's like a cherry on the top of a cake. But you really don't want to live your life being dependent on the approval.
Mm.
You know,
Hmm.
and I think you actually you talk about that. You talk about approval and judgment in your book,
Yeah.
and talking, let's talk a little bit about that. But I before that I want to go back to something else, because it's kind of, it's related, those reactions, the jealousy, our own insecurities. I noticed that when I started putting myself out there a little bit more on Twitter, you know people forget that, sometimes forget that if we follow the same people, I will be seeing their comments, you know.
Yeah.
And so I've seen quite a few sort of snarky, sarcastic slash passive aggressive comments toward me.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, it was very clear that it was, I'm not stupid, right? Okay, would I cut my arm, to guarantee that this was about me? No, but I'm pretty sure that these comments were, addressed sort of, they were referring to me, right?
Yeah.
and and that's the thing. In a low mood, probably I would be very reactive, and I might even get into some kind of unpleasant exchange
Get
with
into a
that
fight about
person,
it. Yeah.
right? But thankfully, uh, you know and here's the thing. I understand that when we feel insecure or unhappy with our own situation, and we see someone thriving, right, being successful, I can absolutely see how that we start thinking, oh my God, I wish I was there. Why am I not in doing what they're doing? Why can't I make it? And all these thoughts, the more you dwell on those thoughts, they make you feel even worse and worse and worse, right? So I think it's a completely human experience. And I would be a hypocrite if I told you that I've never experienced these thoughts,
Hmm.
that I never thought to myself, oh my God, stop showing off like your success, or like, do we really need to see another success of yours, or another successful venture, or or your weight loss, or like God knows what else, right? Would I have these thoughts going through my mind? Absolutely. But I have enough awareness to know that this is my insecurities, this is my own thoughts speaking, and
Yeah.
it has nothing to do with that person. And it's certainly um I'm sort of aware and adult enough to stop myself from going, and how I say, it doesn't make me go and shit all over their feeds,
No,
or
absolutely.
profiles, or I can have enough self-restraint and self-awareness to not go and express my dissatisfaction and say something unpleasant to them, right?
I mean, I practice this very hard, um, but also I'm gonna use an example. So David Walliams, right? The
Mm-hmm.
he's I, yeah, the entertainer. I don't he's not my cup of tea, not my taste.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people like him, and he's very talented at what he does, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
he also writes children's books. And my mother, I'm sorry, mother, if you're listening to this, but she can't stand him. She's not a fan. And then when he wrote these children's books, and was quite successful, my mother's reaction was like, oh, why does he think he can do this now as well? Why is it that these comedians, they do this, And then I was thinking to myself, if I was David Walliams, would I kind of stop myself from writing children's books? Because why should people like me also
Mm-hmm.
do these kind of things? And I thought, actually, no, good on him, and
Yeah.
good on anyone who is getting by and doing well. And you know what, if you're like you say, what arises within you is about you. And if you are angry that someone else is being successful, or you are making jokes at the expense of someone who's putting themselves out there, and facing that fear of what will people think of me when I put myself out there, then
Mm-hmm.
you need to really readjust your internal thinking. And I've worked hard, and I work very hard on a kind of radical non-judgment. And I try to apply this to everyone, from my friends to my next door neighbors to even to Donald Trump. I try to, it's kind of,
Ambitious.
yeah, it's ambitious and it's a practice.
That's very ambitious, Chris.
And I have to really rein myself in every time, like Donald
Good.
Trump opens his mouth. I have to really rein myself in. But I have to remember that, like, all of these people are humans, and all of these people feel and they think, and they're trying to do the best they can with what they've got. And whether their ideology is different to mine, whatever their kind of motivations are, we need to kind of stop judging and being critical, because that's a cheap shot, really. So say you went and put yourself out there, you post videos on your Instagram feed of you dancing and things like this. It'd be a cheap shot for me to go, oh, Maggie's done another one of her videos of dancing, oh God, when is she going to stop dancing? Or I
I've seen a lot of snarky comments on my referring to my TikTok dances. Yeah.
But or I could say, wow, that's brave, cool, good on her. Maggie's like getting out there and she's dancing and she's like sharing some good energy. And it's like, which of those is the more healthier option? Do we kind of encourage people and let their energy kind of infect us
Mhm.
as well, or do
But
we
the thing is, like, you can even approach it very selfishly. That when you have these thoughts, encouraging thoughts yourself about that person, even if you don't express them, you feel better as a
Yeah,
result.
absolutely. Yeah. And I don't like David Walliams particularly. He's not my kind of, I don't immediately switch on the television as soon as one of his
Mm-hmm.
programs is on. But
Mm-hmm.
he's doing stuff. He's building a life for himself, and
Yep.
he's doing it very well. And I applaud that. And I
Yep.
applaud the people who are also trying things and haven't quite got his level of success. I applaud people who are trying different things. I kind of applaud anyone who's putting themselves out there and stepping into the arena and trying stuff, because
Absolutely.
Brené Brown says, I mean, Brené Brown presumably, but she she has a book, Daring Greatly,
They're great, yeah.
and there's a very famous quote that title comes from, and it basically says, if you're going to step into the arena, you're going to get a kicking.
Mm-hmm.
But then that goes very well with a quote from Jean-Luc, I think it's Jean-Luc Godard, the film director, and it's, you know, anyone who's stepping into the abyss owes no explanation to people who are standing on the sidelines and watching. You know, it's like, I'm the one who's putting the dancing videos out there. I'm the one who's prepared for people to think I look stupid, or, you
Mm-hmm.
know, because I'm taking that risk and I'm embracing that fear, and I'm saying I'm not going to let this fear stop me from doing this. And
And
that's what I
you
applaud.
know, you know what's crazy about these? By the way, if you guys don't know what we're talking about my TikTok videos.
Just as an example, I mean, but this is the same for, you know, if you put a book out there, or if you post a
Hmm.
selfie or whatever it is, if you do something, there's always going to be someone who says, you know, I ran the London Marathon, and I can imagine there was, when I set out to do it, I can imagine someone saying, Chris, running the London Marathon, you know,
Hmm.
yeah, while they're
Hmm.
sitting on the sofa eating more
Hmm.
crisps, you know what I mean? And it's very easy to be critical like that. Oh, look at this person doing this. Oh, and actually,
Hmm.
it's a reflection of us not having the bravery or the courage to do it ourselves, you know?
I mean, look, that's another thing that we were talking about when we were doing the interview with you, which was that, you know, I am yet to meet a person that is just content. I'm not talking happy, I'm not talking
Mm.
ecstatic, I'm talking just content within themselves, with their lives, you know, that would say anything discouraging or hurtful to anyone, sort of, you know, deliberately. You
Yeah,
know, it just doesn't go, which is worth remembering, that every time someone says something hurtful, you know, it really just reflects their state of mind, first of all,
yeah,
the way they look, but ultimately it really is a reflection of their unhappiness,
yeah,
dissatisfaction, you know. So when I'm willing to see that, I find myself ending up not only being reactive and not taking comments like that personally, but I actually feel compassion, and I don't mean it in a sort of patronizing way, you know. i
yeah,
i genuinely feel, man, like I feel you, you know, I feel you. I know what it's like to feel like my life is shit, you know, and I'm
yeah,
worthless and nothing is going my way when someone is thriving right in front of me, right?
absolutely. Yeah,
So, you know, but it boils down to knowing that it boils down to having that awareness and realizing that however you react, it's on you. You know what I mean? It's how
yeah,
you think about it ultimately that is going to determine your reaction. It's got nothing to do with what's said or written or that person or anything else, you know?
yeah, completely. And you know, when we say, oh God, this person's made me really angry, or this person makes me sick, or this person,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
or this situation is so unfair, and I'm really
Mm-hmm.
hurt by this, or I'm,
Mm-hmm.
you know, life hasn't treated me properly. We're saying, well, okay, I have no power over anything
Mm-hmm.
that, you
Mm-hmm.
know, no, I have no power over my own life or how I feel or anything like that. I was in town a few months ago, and I saw two women sitting on a park bench, and this is not in any way critical of them, but
Mm-hmm.
it's, they were smoking cigarettes, they were heavily morbidly obese, and they were
Mm-hmm.
scratching lottery scratch cards.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me is people who have no agency over their own life. So, you know, they feel powerless because they think the only way they're going to have a happy life is if they win the lottery.
Mm-hmm.
They they think, I can't, you know, I have no control over my health, I have no control over my situation. And it's kind of a situation that a lot of us find ourselves in, and certainly I felt powerless over my own situation at one point when I was driving the van for a living. And
Yeah, we both know that feeling. We
yeah,
both know exactly what it feels like.
but it's almost like that feeling is, it's normalized now.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we all feel like good things like this don't happen to people like us. You know
Mm-hmm.
how, you know, you look at people who are going out there doing things, writing books, maybe starting companies, creating art, you know, putting themselves out there, and we kind of think, well, that could never happen to me. I could never do
Mhm.
that, And it's like me going from someone who can't to someone who can. We've got this kind
Mhm.
of mindset of like, here I am, and I am stuck. And somehow these people who are doing these things, like they need to either be ridiculed, or they've somehow stolen their success from us, or, when actually deep down we've got the power to do so much. And that's kind of what the book is about. We need to shine. Whatever is aligned with us in here, we need to fulfill that potential, because that's where life comes to us. When we're doing the things that are aligned with who we are, that's when we realize our
Mhm.
power and contentment, and we get our rewards that way.
Right. I lost the chapter where you talk about how we're. Can you actually talk about it then? Because uh, in yeah, I took it out
Okay.
and then I can't find it. Very smart move on my part. Um, you mentioned, just like I talk about it a lot in my book, you talk about it in your book, which is that we are not our thoughts, right? And I
Yeah.
think this is part of what we're talking about here, that um, sometimes the way we see ourselves, the stories that we're used to about ourselves,
Mhm.
what we are capable of, what we're not capable of, who we are, who we're not, we treat those stories as something fixed, rather than recognizing that this is all just another thought created story.
Mhm.
A story is created, yes, because the thing is, like, we will think about ourselves a certain way, and then we will look for evidence in circumstances or situations that confirm that what we were thinking is true, right?
Yeah.
Rather than looking for the evidence that actually proves it isn't, or at least, we could easily question it, right? So it's so easy to just stay attached to the story, to the identity that we built about ourselves. So the idea sometimes when you say to people, but this is all just a mind creation, that identity, that story, people get really pissed off, right? Because
Yeah.
it's almost like you're undermining, the basis on which they've built their lives, their entire lives. So can you talk a little bit about that? Can you explain what you mean when you say that uh, we are not our thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I wrote the book such a long time ago. I can't remember exactly what I said, but the basic principle is that, like, there's this narrative going on in many of our heads, and certainly it was going on in mine when I was struggling.
Mm-hmm.
And we think it's us. We think it's almost like part of our identity. And in a way, we become kind of attached to this negative story because we've known it for so long, and it's always kind of proven to be true that.
Hold on, Chris. I found it.
Oh, you
I
found it.
apologize for this
Cool.
this disrupting. Um, when we understand that we are not our thoughts and that we are not their subject, we can free ourselves from their control and regain the joy in life that negative thinking would otherwise deny us. We can choose our inputs. We can choose our inputs. Choose to pay attention to the things that trigger the kinds of feelings we wish to feel, and craft an existence of bliss, of confidence, of being someone that is empowered, content, and fully relishing everything that life has to offer. We don't have to be angry. We don't have to be hurt. We don't have to be offended. We don't have to save face. We don't need to be afraid. We don't have to be proud. We can choose to use that energy for far more beneficial and interesting things instead.
Yeah, completely. I mean, well, there it is.
There you go.
We have this kind of addiction to everything that's going wrong. It's like we we read the news. We're addicted to hearing, what's Trump done now. I'm sorry to keep bringing him up, but he's a good example of something that
Yeah.
triggers a lot of people.
Oh, yeah.
And we're kind of addicted to this outrage in the same way that we're kind of addicted to these negative stories about ourselves.
Hmm.
And I had an article in the Guardian where I talked about meditation and how it had been really beneficial to me and it helped me a lot. And I
Hmm.
had a few people approach me and said, "Can you help me do this?" And I kind of said, "Okay, well, we need to basically put some work in here to get ourselves out of this kind of thinking pattern and to get ourselves out of this situation." And there was so attached to this kind of notion of like, well, no, it's not going to work for me, or I can't do this because I'm someone who can't do this. Everything's stacked against me. I don't have time. I don't have the
Mm-hmm.
resources. And there's this
Mm-hmm.
kind of attachment to this old way of thinking based on these terrible things that might have happened in the past, or but based on a lack of success, or based
Mm-hmm.
on, these kind of negative undermining narratives that like, well, why even bother, because it'll never work out,
Mm-hmm.
and it,
Or we take into account certain instances where, for example, we have not felt confident, and we make it to be part of our identity, which is that we are not confident people.
yeah.
And then we treat it as something that is a fixed feature
Hmm.
or characteristics.
Yeah.
And then, of course, if you treat it as something fixed, then you cannot even consider the possibility that that might not be the case. And you're certainly not going to be willing to explore examples in your life where actually you were very confident, even though you wouldn't call it yourself that way
Yeah.
in many other instances, right?
And we go around kind of thinking life is unfair, and that is how we frame everything. Life is unfair. I'm never going to get my reward, and and I'm pretty unhappy about that. So why even bother applying for that job? Why even
Mm-hmm.
bother?
Mm-hmm.
And we associate ourselves with like, I'm a pretty negative person. I'm pretty, there's nothing good going for me. So
Mm-hmm.
why try and be positive, or why try and kind of shift my mental attitude? But we don't have to feel like that way. We don't have to be angry at life. We don't have to be angry
Mm-hmm.
at Trump. We don't have to be angry at, we can just, there's a lot of information coming at us all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And we can either choose to tune into all the kind of stuff that's gonna trigger us, or gonna
Mm-hmm.
make us feel miserable, or we can start to look at the good news. We can start to look at our strengths.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I did I always thought I was bad with money, and I have this kind of identity. Oh, I'm Chris and I'm bad with money.
I don't think so. I know so.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And it's like, I'm Chris, I'm bad with money. That's how it is.
Yes.
And that is a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy.
Mm-hmm.
But it's based on a kind of a selection of examples where I've not had enough money, or I've spent too much money, or I've ended up kind of borrowing money or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I could easily choose from a whole host of examples that show the opposite, where I've been very good with money, where I've saved money, where I've, and it's really, I've just chosen this narrative because it kind of fits with whatever negative picture that I
Mm-hmm.
attach
Mm-hmm.
to myself. And you
Mm-hmm.
could say the
Mm-hmm.
same thing about other things, like I hear a lot of people saying, oh, I've trusted people too many times and I'll never
Mm-hmm.
trust someone again. And it's like, I would rather trust and be compassionate 1,000 times and be hurt every time than become someone who will never trust anyone again. It's like, it's not about these stories that we tell ourselves. We can tell ourselves whatever we want. And yeah, I don't know where I'm going really. I feel like I'm going off
But
a little bit.
but no, we're still very much on track in that. To me, when I say, at least, I think we mean the exact same thing when we talk about we're not our thoughts. What I mean by that is that those identities and stories are all up for questioning. These are
Yeah,
not facts, even though they may appear as facts, right?
yeah,
And the moment we realize that actually we are so much more than our stories, our experiences, right? That anything that we think about ourselves is changeable and up
yeah,
for questioning, then your mind opens and you really start looking at yourself and what you're capable of, differently, right? But you need to be, I think one of the biggest obstacles that I've seen with people wanting to experience change is exactly that, is the lack of willingness to let go of a story, to let go of an identity, to let go of certain idea about who you are, what you can and what you cannot do. I mean, one of the great examples, like I did an interview with Johnny Swanson, who's just a brilliant human being, ex-veteran suffering from PTSD, who's gone through an incredible transformation after he read my book. And this is not self-congratulatory. It's really just, this book, you know, one book will resonate differently with different people, right? So one person will read that book and is not going to experience any change, and some will experience a little shift. For him, it triggered major aha moments that have been absolutely life changing. So we got to sit down and talk about it, right?
Fantastic.
And one of the things he talked about was letting go of this idea that his dyslexia is problematic.
Yeah.
Right? So this is exactly what I'm talking about. It's not, when we talk about how our thoughts create our experiences, we are not denying certain facts about our lives, right? We're not denying or questioning that life is kicking our butts or that there are challenging situations that we are in. That's not what it's about, right? He was a great example of someone who basically was dyslexic and looked all his life at his dyslexia as being one of the major obstacles and stumbling blocks in his attempts to do anything in life. So, for example, to the idea that he would be on video, in public, talking or reading a book out loud to someone on camera, it was unthinkable for him only 2 months ago, right?
Amazing, yeah.
Because he had these ideas that it's the dyslexia, that is responsible for that. So therefore he will never be doing these things, right? So he's still dyslexic, but what has changed? His thoughts about his dyslexia have changed. He had this epiphany and aha moment where he realized, I'm dyslexic, and that doesn't have to be a problem.
Well,
I can still be dyslexic and go on camera. I can still be dyslexic and read the book out loud. I can still be dyslexic and do that. It's just that he doesn't treat himself and his dyslexia so seriously anymore, and therefore it is not an issue anymore.
But it's like you said, you're holding on to these identities,
Mm-hmm.
and for me, photography was one of those things. It's for 10 years I worked as a photographer, and eventually I became a little bit jaded, and then I ended up driving this van for a living.
Mm-hmm.
But I refused to look at opportunities because I kept on saying to myself, but I'm a photographer. But I'm a photographer. I can't do this because I'm a photographer. And actually, I hadn't been working as a photographer in a year because I've been driving a van trying to make ends meet. But as soon as I let go of that, defining myself by this thing, which it was a dream and actually was probably hurting me, I'm still a photographer, but I'm now much more than just a photographer.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when opportunity started to appear to me. And this one thing that I was holding on to, as soon as I let that go, my life got so much bigger. And just like holding on to that dyslexia, but I'm dyslexic.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, you're not just dyslexic. There's much more to you than that. It's like
correct.
saying, I will never get from A to B because I can't drive. I can't drive, so I'm going to be stuck in the house my whole life because I can't drive. And it's like,
as if it was the only way to get to that
exactly,
point,
yeah.
right?
It's like, I can't drive, and it's like, well, there's a bus stop at the end of your road that you could walk. There's there's a bicycle shop next door. There's so many things you can do. But when you're so fixated on this identity and this thought pattern, I'm a person who can't. I could never fit my own kitchen, or I could never have a mortgage, or I could never publish a book.
I had the same thing about my book. It was actually I was so fixed on this. When I realized, the moment I felt compelled to write the book, immediately I had that thought going off in my head, which is, I'm not a writer. Who do you think you are that you can write a book? Because I had these preconceived ideas that, people who write fiction, who have this incredible imagination, create these amazing characters, they can call themselves writers, but I can't, right? But this was my preconceived idea. This is not true, right? But for a moment it felt real. It felt like a valid point, and I was stuck with it for at least few months until I just gave up, because I was like, this is ridiculous. I just have to write this book, right? But this is a great example of, if I wasn't aware that it wasn't the truth, it was me having just this thought in my head that I basically insist on holding on to, then I would never write this book.
Well,
right?
I think my first book, Do the Thing, Have the Power, it probably took me about 3 or 4 years to write. And the
Mm-hmm.
first 2 or 3 years of that was probably me trying to convince myself to actually write it.
Correct. It took me
You know what I
about
mean?
a
It's
year
like
and a half.
we kind of just get in our own way so much, because a lot of it is because, oh, someone like me would never write a book.
Mm-hmm.
I can't
Mm-hmm.
do something like that, and what will people think of me? It's like, and you can almost in your head, you're hearing the voices, of people saying, have you seen Chris has written a book? And, you can
Oh
hear the
yeah.
laughter going
Oh
out,
yeah.
echoing across the landscape.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, this just, as we said before, this just says so much about our own insecurities.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You
But
know,
what was incredibly interesting as well, which is that when I started to actually write the first draft, I only struggled to really write it when I was trying to write it in a way that would sound cool or smart, or thinking like, is this person going to like what I said? Is this person going to approve of what I'm saying? Is it okay to say this? Or is this person going to misunderstand me? Oh my God, it was the worst chapter that I wrote. The one where I kept on taking into account all these filters and writing to please someone, to the moment I switched that off and decided, no, I'm going to write it without filters, and to hell what anyone is going to think about it. I have to write with my authentic voice, and I have to say things without filters. And if people are going to think that I'm woo or lost my shit, then be it. But I can't be writing with those filters and be inauthentic.
absolutely. And the moment you start adding those filters, and we do it in our daily lives all the time, we do it in the way we dress ourselves, the way we go about business, the people we hang out with, the tribes that
Oh yeah.
that we're in. We're putting filters on ourselves constantly, and we're doing it in our life decisions as well, the choices we
Mm-hmm.
make. And this is where you end up living a life that isn't aligned with who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why you absolutely had to write that chapter and just accept that people are going to think you're bonkers, or you're unusual, or you're a little bit
Mm-hmm.
extra, whatever it
Mm-hmm.
is that people think. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what I did with my last book. And I don't want to keep going on about books. I don't want to, sound like we're kind of self-promoting just the whole time. But
I'm going to promote you, but no problem. Shining Manifesto here. I'm gonna take that job from you, so you don't have to do it.
thank you. But it's like the book is a little bit. I've approached it in a slightly different way. I've written stories in there. There's Japanese poetry. There's all kinds of
Mm-hmm.
things going in there, and it's almost a little bit like, I know what a book is supposed to look like, and I
Mm-hmm.
know that people are going to read this and kind of think, actually, what the hell is this? This is
Mm-hmm.
there's a story in here, or a parable,
Mm-hmm.
or something like this. And it's a little bit of trying to push myself beyond my comfort zone and just say, forget what people think, because as soon as you push past that, that's when you start to find out who you really are, and you become more aligned with your true self, your true north. As soon as
Mm-hmm.
you stop looking for permission and approval and validation from the external world, that's when you find you're on your right path,
Mm-hmm.
and you're doing.
But this is the last point I wanted to raise, actually, because I know that we're coming to the end.
Oh, are we already?
Yeah, I know, it's crazy. It's 4:45. So I think that's a huge theme. This whole idea of wanting approval, and being afraid of other people's judgment. In the context of going after the things that we want.
Yeah.
Um, what would you say? Because I would be a hypocrite if I told you that I don't care about people's approval. I would be a real hypocrite if I told you that I don't care that someone is going to like, whether it's my book or what I say on Twitter and things like that. But I think the difference is that I got to the point, and that is not, it's quite a recent thing. It's only happened after my epiphany happened as to how this whole thing called life works, is that I no longer attach my value, or I don't need somebody's approval in order to do what I enjoy doing, and to just be myself, and show things. The stupid TikTok videos. I actually, with TikTok videos, I didn't even care. It didn't even occur to me what people are going to think. There was only after I only started thinking about it when I saw those snarky comments, about TikTok. And that's when I realized, I think I'm at the point where I'm absolutely okay with the fact that my work, myself, what I say is not everybody's cup of tea. Does it hurt sometimes? When I don't get the validation or something like that? For sure, it can get me occasionally. But I think there's something very liberating when you just do what you feel compelled naturally to do,
Yeah.
and do it regardless, because the more you start doing it, the less it really that validation or approval of other people matters. And also I think it allows you to just gather people that are your kind of people and forget the rest. What do you think
Absolutely.
about that?
Yeah, I mean, I have a little YouTube channel and I publish videos on my Instagram feed and I publish on YouTube, and it's just me talking to the camera.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever I am about to upload a new video, I'm always terrified about what people are going to think. And it's my biggest weakness is what people are going to think. It's my big fear. And that kind of, rather than let it stop me, which it would have done in the past, and I produce these videos. I think people are going to think I'm stupid. People are going to be thinking, "Oh, here we go, Chris. He thinks he's some kind of intellectual or something." And I could let that stop me doing these things and putting them out there, or I could see it as a signpost of absolutely what I must do. As this is the edge of my comfort zone, and I
Mm-hmm.
need to do this. And I hate looking at myself on video, and I hate hearing my own voice. But I need to do this because this is where the fear is, and I need to step out of my comfort zone, because what's the alternative? We just do nothing. We draw the curtains and we stay in our house, and we never come out, and no one needs to know that we ever existed. Or we can embrace life and embrace living and put ourselves out there, and let people make their snarky comments, let people think
Mm-hmm.
whatever they want to think, because
Mm-hmm.
if they think those things, it's probably a sign that they're not living their authentic life.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Mm-hmm.
if they were creating, if they were working towards what brought them joy and happiness, and taking those chances of embracing that fear themselves, they will celebrate you.
Mm-hmm.
Whether they agree with you or not, they will celebrate you. And I could, from the comfort of my own home, I could write a snarky tweet about whoever I want. I could
Oh
get,
yeah, it's very courageous act, isn't
yeah,
it? Yeah.
exactly, and be like, oh, Chris has done another one of his stupid videos.
Right.
Or I could be trying to experiment with new things myself and say, oh, Chris has done another video. I wonder how that's going. I wonder how he feels about that. I wonder if many people kind of agree with that. I might do a couple myself, or I might write my
Yeah.
own thing, or I might start blogging, or I might start, whatever it is that I'm passionate about. I might write a cookery book, or I might just explore an interest and do things. There are people who are afraid to stoke the fire in here, and you don't have to put yourself in the public eye, but you can explore the things that light your fire, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what we almost like we have a responsibility to embrace those things, because that's what we're here for. That's who we
Mm-hmm.
are. We're humans. We are emotional people and beings, and we can't deny that anymore. We can't keep hiding that light. We need to embrace it somehow. I don't know. Was that
I think we're gonna end on this note.
yeah? Do you think so?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think the basic thing I'm trying to say in all of my stuff is that we're weird and we're unusual, and we're we're all different, and that's what makes us wonderful. And we could either go, we're different, oh, stay away, or we can say we're different and we're weird, and that's amazing, that's brilliant, and you know, we need to build on that and embrace it and celebrate it and see what happens.
I think what comes out very clearly from this conversation is just this, that basically we want to encourage everyone to really focus more on their true desires, to become more aware of how these social cultural ideas, our upbringing, and so on, and so social media,
Yeah,
how it affects how we think about ourselves,
it
how it
can
affects
stifle
the
us.
choices that we make, right? and just become more aware of that and continue checking in. Which is why I was saying it's not about ignoring other people's opinions or ideas or advice, not at all. Be well informed by all means, right? But continue to be checking in with yourself whether any kind of advice, any kind of information that you receive resonates with you and feels right, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of putting yourself out there, I would say just do you, just be you, because I think it's when we try to be somebody else, is when we're trying to copy someone or do something similar to that person that's popular in social media. That's when not only it becomes a nightmare for ourselves, because it's not fun in my book to be trying to be
Or
someone
even
other
just
than,
looking for approval, you know.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But in that way, it may take time, you know, it may not build your big following like in 2 days, you know, but it's worth it, because you're going to be resonating with the right kind of people, and they will be your tribe, they will be your community, and you'll know that they will like you for who you are and not what you're trying to be or pretending to be. And I think that people really, really are attracted to, people can really pick up on this authenticity. They can tell straight away when someone is having, you know, sort of their motives are not sort of clean, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? And finally, we talked about this awareness that is such a huge game changer when we realize that we really are powerful beyond measure, when we realize that we're not victims of life, that we are responsible for how we experience everything and anything that happens in life, that we have the choice in how we respond to any circumstances or people, right? And that is, I understand that to some this is not a good news, because being living in that state of victimhood, and I say it with no judgment because I've been there and done that,
yeah, absolutely.
it's much more, it's easier, you know, it's easier. Simply, it's very uncomfortable, but it's easier, you know. So it takes a while for us to be ready to let go and start taking that responsibility, and to start seeing ourselves in a completely different way. But it's way worth it, right?
Absolutely. And you know what, it's about kind of, it's like going to the gym as well. You know, it's like we might find ourselves getting angry about a situation, or being triggered by things, but then we bring it back and we practice, and we, you know, you don't go to the gym once and then you're fixed. With all of this, we're trying to live a kind of more balanced life, and understanding that, you know, our situation and the world around us is something we're directly responsible for, and we have to practice this, and you bring into your life things that you do to help you do this. You try and have a healthy lifestyle, if you like, because, you know, lack of sleep is a bad one for, you know, your state of mind.
Mm-hmm.
You know, good nutrition, there's this whole kind of mind body
Mm-hmm.
spirit thing. But ultimately, the more we realize how powerful we are, the more we're in a position to build the life that we love, and to be content with where we are, and be grateful for what we've got, and to celebrate other people rather than try
Yeah,
and knock them down, you know.
absolutely. Thank you so much, Chris.
No,
Is there anything you want to add in terms of, do you want anyone to visit your website or your YouTube channel, or is there
um,
anything you want me to let people know about?
well, you can. I mean, I blog. I write whimsical things about how wonderful life is on my blog, which is chrisbrock.uk.
Perfect.
And yeah, I think that if we can stop complaining and stop judging, those two things will transform our lives. Gratitude,
Or even start doing it just less,
yeah, completely. Those
right?
things. If we can be grateful, stop complaining, and stop judging, those three things will transform our lives, and we can turn things around for ourselves and for the people we're nearest to as well.
Absolutely. So I highly recommend this book. This is a book to take time with, which is, you know, that's another thing, that there's a lot of books that are very sort of prescriptive and telling us what to do. There's very few books that actually provoke us to reflect, to self-reflect. and this is definitely one of these books, which is why I'm a big fan.
Thank you.
Shine Manifesto, Find Your Authentic Self, Live Your Authentic Life. Then there is the thing, Do the Thing, Have the Power, Overcome Self-Doubt, and Build a Life You Love. It looks like that. And there's a third one, but I don't have it.
Yeah, it's just a collection of my writings, really. It's called Outpost.
There you go.
It's just just collected.
And I'm going to include the links to Chris's YouTube channel, podcast, website. It's all going to be there available, so you can check him out later on. Okay.
Fantastic. Cool.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Cool. Take care now.
Take care. Bye.
Bye. All right, so I hope you enjoyed that. That was me being interviewed by Dr. Maggie Gilewicz, who is the author of this book, How to Make Sure Your Life Doesn't Suck. Get it on Amazon now. And she was talking to me about my book, Shine Manifesto. Also available on Amazon, also worth a read if you are bored in lockdown and have time on your hands. All right, we've got some really good other podcasts coming up, lined up. So if you want to find out more about some of the ones we've already done, some of my writing, stuff like that, head over to chrisbrock.uk. And in the meantime, I hope you're keeping safe under these very strange and peculiar times that we find ourselves in. And look after yourselves, and I will see you next time.